WVOX. From Westchester and now all over the world.
1460 WVOX.
Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome, everybody, to Westchester Eye on the Radio in the snowy weather. April 2nd, I wasn't expecting snow this time of year, but
as your short sleeve shirt emphasizes.
I am wearing a short sleeve shirt. It's spring, and I hadn't been wearing a jacket until today for days. Anyway, our co-hosts today are John Sharan, who will be out next week. So if anyone wants to come frolicking in here and sit in his place, let us know. Maybe we can find a replacement. And of course,
that's a grand share to fill, my friend.
My friend of 34 years, Ardina Seward. Hi, Ardina.
Hi, Peter.
How are you?
Good. Glad that we made it today, despite the snow, but it melted, so we're in good shape.
So we lived the Barry Manilow song. We made it through the rain. Wait a minute, that's snow. Wrong.
But you didn't make it to the opening day.
No, we're past opening day. Well, today we have with us someone that snow in April is not that unusual an event in her life. Her name is Yelena Demikovsky, and she is a budding documentarian. I said documentary filmmaker before we came on air, but John cleared me of that and made sure that I knew that I was not using my big boy words, so I'm changing my big boy words. But she has actually the documentary she's working on. Now, we've all heard of the drink called the Black Russian, right?
Yeah.
John, you know what a Black Russian is, right? Actually, I have no idea what's in a Black Russian.
Yeah, the Black Russian is a drink.
Good.
That's the reason I'm making it, actually. That's because I want to host, we host the film, after it's done, we will have Black Russian cocktails.
Do you know what they're made of? I have no idea what goes into it.
Well, yeah, you will know them. You'll be invited. So.
Oh, I can't wait.
It's Kahlua and milk.
Anyway, this is a real documentary that she's really working on. And like with many documentarians, she's in the process. She's been working on this project for many years. We initially thought 3, but tell us, how long have you been working on this documentary?
Well, not that many, but yeah, just a few years. I mean, it's probably, I would say, the first interview was done on it in 2012, and then kind of stopped. And then, so 2013, that's when it picked up, started moving forward, and then slowed down again. That's what happened with documentaries. So it slowed down again, right. The funding and all that situation, but meanwhile, still the material being collected. And so it's picking up again. So now we're
I'm surprised that some of these organizations like Langston Hughes, there's an organization that supports his work. There is, what is the name of that? I found one, if you remember. There's a place in Harlem. It sounds like it's a Jewish name, but it's a black...
Schomburg Society. It's the Schomburg Society.
Yes, the Schomburg Society.
In the Schomburg Museum, sure. I mean, it would be great, but funding is very, very difficult, and there's so many competing projects out there. Although
but
this one is unique.
This is about African American intellectuals who moved. In many cases, they were intellectuals. They moved to Russia. Some of their families, after they went to Russia, moved back. And some of the people who are living there now have siblings who moved to the United States. And then, from the ones that were interviewed in the 10-minute version of the documentary, which is our 10 minutes and 32 seconds, I think it is, they do not have Russian first names. They have first names, Western names.
You saw it's a trailer, and that was no, but my main character actually does have a Russian name, just like mine, Yelena, and the main character is Yelena Hanga, and she has African last name, so she carries. She's like she has a blood of whatever you can imagine cultures. Flows, in her veins, because she has the blood of Polish Jews, a rabbi, and she has African American, and and lives in Russia, and married Russian man. So she is Yelena, her daughter is Lisa. So they do have Russian names as well.
And we shouldn't forget that the father of Russian literature, Pushkin, was of mixed heritage, whose mother was rumored to be black. Not rumored to be black, apparently was black.
No, it was his great-grandfather was black from Africa, right? Brought by Peter the Great and educated and became a general, got the nobility title. And yes, he probably in this country would have been considered black, but in Russia he was considered a Russian poet, the father of the Russian literature. So. Interesting,
because I've heard of Pushkin. Mel Brooks or Woody Allen in one of his movies referred to. Oh no! In The Producers, Zero Mostel refers to somebody as Pushkin, and we know that has to do with the Russian author. But I had no idea that he was of mixed race, which is kind of interesting to me. I mean, I can't speak for John, but I will assume that the only person we've ever heard of who was a black person who was into communism was Paul Robeson.
Correct.
Right. Well, he's the icon, but there were and
his voice is heard in this 10-minute version of the documentary, which you call it's a trailer.
It's a trailer. It's an old trailer. I mean, that's the first trailer that's cool, but now I'm making a new trailer. But,
okay.
Yes.
Well, we're going to break now, and we're going to have a long break because this is not a communist country. At least not yet. Could become socialist. Who knows?
Never know what's going to happen
with
soon.
this guy. Anyway, we're going to go to break. We're going to speak to our guest, Evgeny, Yelena. When we come back, there's a Fox News break and a Fox Business break. And I'm having trouble hearing where we are here, but we are going to go to that break. This is Westchester Eye on the radio on WVOX, WVOX.com.
Welcome back to Westchester Eye on the radio, our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. I'm John Sharan, along with Peter Moses and Ardina Seward. And our special in-studio guest this week is Yelena Demikovsky, a documentarian who's making a film about black Americans who did move back in the Stalinist era to Russia. And Yelena, you simply, I can tell from your voice, you have some Russian background to you. What led you to choose this subject matter? It's a rather unusual subject matter for anybody to talk about, but what led you to choose this to make a film?
That's why, because I probably have a Russian background. That's why. That would happen. But I moved to this country, 20 years, more than 20 years ago, and then I actually bumped into this book called Russia and the Negro, and that was actually it's a book, a history of blacks coming to Russia long time before the 1930s era. So I know that history, and then I was very surprised and started reading the book by Alison Blakely. He's a historian. I interviewed him for the film, and that's when I learned that this particular story, and we had this movie. We all grew up on watching this one movie. We were in love with a little boy, black boy, Jim Patterson, and the movie was made in 1936. It's like a typical Hollywood movie, propaganda, but beautifully done and everything by, with a famous actress. And that little black boy happened to be in that when I'm reading in this book, and suddenly see, he actually is a descendant of one of those black Americans who come to the Soviet Union. And I was shocked because we had no idea. Most of us didn't know. We thought, maybe some African background, because mostly Africans were coming in the 60s, but we didn't know that actually was that story. So I was completely shocked with that story. I had no idea it happened. And then when I was introducing myself to the story, I kind of was mesmerized, because I knew that during Stalin times, when they were building a new country in the 20s and 30s, a lot of Westerners, not only, and from Asia as well, where people were coming to help build a new country. And during Great Depression era, more people were coming. And then a lot of them were Jewish people as well, coming from the U.S., for example, coming for a dream, That's actually the story is about. It's about the dreamers. So, and then I learned that there were intellectuals, black intellectuals, coming to Russia and teaching Russians how to use, let's say, how in the cotton fields, how to use the machinery. They actually the first ones who introduced Russia with Turkey, the Turkey.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. And so there was one of those black agriculturalists. So he was in charge of the farms. They made him, in charge of the farms. And my main character, Yelena Hanga, her grandfather, who was a recruiter, he was a black American intellectual, also agricultural, who knew all this cotton production, and he recruited a group of 16 people who came to Russia and they were sent to Uzbekistan. He was married to a Jewish American woman, a rabbi's daughter. And of course, there was segregation, so they were not. Her family didn't want them to be married, and not like he was welcomed in his neighborhood in Harlem as well. So they felt like completely isolated. So they decided to go to the Soviet Union for their dream. Both of them got married in 1928. They go to Russia in 1931. They had a daughter. In 1934, Lily Golden, and who became very much involved with the movement, the African movement, and became Angela Davis' friend and helping, like Russians they play a big part in the civil rights movement in this country, and a lot of people don't know. So that's when I got completely, mesmerized with the story, and I thought it has to be told. And whoever you talk to, most of the people have no idea.
And many people might say that when they would think about this and say, I need to tell the story, they might think that they need to tell the story and they would do it in a written form. You chose to do it with a documentary film, which is a rather unusual way to go about it. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you went with a documentary film.
Well, I have my theater background from Moscow, where I was, doing directing, studying directing theater. I came to this country and actually I studied video TV in Boston. So when I moved to New York, I started making films, documentaries. They're more artistic style, so it's not that easy to be. But anyway, I'm not the best promoter of my own work.
Is this your first documentary?
No.
Okay.
No.
Tell us about your background.
A few documentaries. I did some theater here, and I made documentaries on festivals, and stuff like that, and presented in festivals. But yes, no, and this one, it's a message. It's kind of important, and I think it's becoming more and more important.
What's the message?
The message is, if you have a dream, and if you get killed, and we know, like Martin Luther King said, that you cannot kill a dream.
Mm-hmm.
So I also want to add, you plant the seed. The dreamers are gone, but the seed is there. So don't just stop dreaming. The seeds, I am actually interviewing them, and they have their own children, and they're all in my film. They live in both countries, and they do believe in that great future. No matter what, their parents, they were American idealists who went to Russia. They were, all married to idealists as well. And, idealists, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that idea which drives people, and we live in one planet, and it has to be somehow, we have to believe in it. We all have to be together and stick with that.
I like the title very much of your movie. It seems to be a very telling description of what it's all about. It's called Black Americans' Red Experience.
Black Russians.
Exactly right. And we will have more talking about this interesting new documentary that's still in process. We're speaking with Yelena Demikovsky, a documentary filmmaker, who's talking about the Black American experience for expatriates who have moved to Russia back in the Stalinist era in the 20s and the 30s, and what their descendants are doing these days. You're listening to Westchester WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Charan, along with Peter Moses and Ardina Seward. We'll be back with more topical conversation after a brief Fox News break, so stay tuned.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Charan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
We are back. Thanks for staying with us, folks. We are into our second half hour of Westchester Eye on the Radio. I am Ardina Seward with Peter Moses and John Charan, and our special guest today is Yelena Demikovsky, who has done in the process of doing a documentary film called the Black Red Experience, Black
Russians, the Red Experience.
And we have a clip from the documentary. So, John, let's go to the videotape.
Absolutely. This is one of the descendants of the people who've moved there, and this is part of that documentary.
My grandmother was named Yelena Jones, and then she married a man named Charles Burroughs, so she became Yelena Jones Burroughs. They were activists for better rights for black people in general. And so she became more and more interested in the Soviet Union and more interested in going there. And she started going to the international congresses of the Communist Party. But then, I think it was 1929 when she actually went to the one in the Soviet Union.
Marina Burroughs, who is speaking there, she's related to Yelena Jones Burroughs, who moved there apparently in 1941, it seems to be, from the records here under the FBI that they have there. So it was one of those situations that you were talking about, the Great Depression being an impetus for a lot of this happening. When these people moved there, about how many moved to Russia at the time, and how many of them actually stayed?
Well, they were going back and forth. Maybe like about 90 people going back and forth. That was after the revolution, which happened in 1917. People were coming back and forth and studying, going to the communist in institutes were all over the country, in Moscow. So they were going back and forth. And at some point, when the Great Depression happened, there were, groups of people came, and maybe about 12 families stayed. And some were still going, but 1937, the borders were closed. So Stalin announced then either you stay in Russia and denounce your citizenship, or you just go back to your country. So some of them did stay in Russia, got the Russian Soviet citizenship, and they stayed. And because they already had families, and some, they were all mixed, they had nothing to lose anyway. That's what they thought, of course. What happened after, it's a different story. The repressions, purges, and a lot of them got very, disappointed and depressed, and everything happened because it was, things were changing. So the dream got tarnished in a way, But, the families, and they had their children, and they still had good salaries. The children still had a different life that they would have had here.
And I would guess that the hardships of World War II probably had some negative impacts as well.
That's right. But, some state in Uzbekistan was considered better, life was better there, and people like, for example, were evacuated from Russia, from Moscow, and, to Uzbekistan because that was warmer and the country was in a different, kind of situation was there. So, yes, they went through that. And in fact, Yelena Borot, who you mentioned, she came earlier as well, and she stayed through the whole war because they actually wouldn't let her go. She stayed, and she was a reporter for the American radio, like in English, Russian radio, reporting the war.
Mm-hmm.
About the war. She reported in English, and that's why she was needed in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Until she went through a lot. She went through hardship. So she came back. She died like in 2 months after that. She really went. She stayed in Moscow.
Were the majority of blacks who left America and moved to Russia, were they communists when they were here, or did they convert to communism? Did they become communists when they moved to Russia?
Not all of them were communists. Even Paul Robeson wasn't a communist. He was accused of being a communist, but he actually wasn't. He was, very much into supporting. That's a different story. So not all of them were communists. Let's say that the man, George Tynes, who introduced Russia with Turkey and the Peking duck. So he was growing, and he never was a communist. But Elena Hangas, the main character's grandfather, he was a communist, and he became communist here. They didn't really become communists there, But William Patterson, who was going back and forth, and then in 1937, when the border was closed, he was a friend of Paul Robeson, and he actually was the one who played a big, part in civil rights movement here. He was studying communist. He was a communist, but here they became communists. They wouldn't do,
How were they? Is there a parallel between the way they were accepted in Russia compared to how they were accepted in countries such as France during that time?
Well, yeah, you could say the parallel because at that time, Russia didn't have any blacks at all. Kind of, there were people of color, let's say, in different republics. But at that time, because of Soviets decided to get away with religion, with nationalities, with color at all. So that they were all embraced. But when the blacks came, of course, they were different. So they were loved. They were just practically loved there. Women got crazy about them. Anyway, they wanted to have children with them and everything. So one of the heroes of the film, he has 7 children by 7 women. So they loved him so much. He's a son. He's a descendant, a son of the mixed couple. So his father came, and he became a famous, well-known actor who played all kinds of, blacks in the movies, whether they were from Africa or from here. But in terms of France, yes, France was a different story. France really liked also kind of more exotic personalities there, and they welcomed artists. So it's a little different kind of in a way, because at this point, Russians, and when they came to Russia, they really helped as scientists as well.
That's what I'm trying to understand, because if you want to get out of Dodge, why settle on Moscow when you hang out in the Parisian cafes? So why do you think that they opted for Russia as opposed to the
they didn't hang out in Russian cafes, but no cafes there. But they learned how to drink vodka and how to hang out with women.
It was vodka over wine.
Oh, they loved it. Yeah, you have to drink vodka in Russia, otherwise with women it's cold. So kind of fun, and women loved them. They were they carried them in their arms, taking care of them. So of course they were like Don Juans walking around. So they loved it.
So they were esteemed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all later when 1960 Patrice Lumumba University was open in.
Let me cut you off a second because we're getting close to the end of our quarter hour. So stay with us, folks. Come back and we'll have more to talk about, and also how you can give her some money for this film.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to the final quarter of Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm Peter Moses. I'm not introducing my other two co-hosts because they're being mean to me today. Our guest is also being mean to me today. Her name is Yelena Demikovsky.
But you have to talk to somebody, so you'll talk to her.
So, exactly. I'm not talking to John Sharan or Ardina Seward. They're both meanie jelly beanies. Anyway, I know that when we were during break, we were talking about the fact that there is a narrative that you're putting together for this documentary, and you said that there is a person who embodies the whole ideal of what's behind this documentary. So why don't you tell us a little bit about her? And then after we do that, we want to also give listeners a chance to write down information so they can donate money to this really, truly unbelievable documentary that you're trying to put together. Please.
Yes, the main character who lives in Moscow, her name is Yelena Hanga. She lives in Moscow with her family, married Russian, and she has a daughter there where she trains her to be a tennis player. Her grandfather's dream to be for his daughter to be a tennis player. Her mother became a champion tennis player of Uzbekistan, and she was the only black woman ever, and being champion player. So that's how the grandfather's dream was, coming through, just through those generations of women. Yelena herself was a tennis player. Now her daughter being trained as a tennis player.
So what does she do now?
But she is a famous TV personality in Moscow. She hosted the first TV show. It's like Russian opera. She hosted the first TV show in the 90s, a first show on sex as a talk
Dr.
show.
Ruth.
No, it wasn't that psychological. It was like really a talk show, chat show with the audience on sex. After Gorbachev came, after the perestroika, it was the first time where the Russians heard and talked about it out loud. There was about all kinds of questions about homosexuality, about you name them. So it's the first time they ever talk about it. So she became very famous then. She's a journalist, and she also is now she had a lot of programs after that, and she's very well known TV personality. She's also the only the best known black face on the Russian television.
And who's she descended from? What's her background?
Her grandfather was Oliver Golden. And he was a black American communist who I mentioned before. He was agriculturist. And her grandmother, whose native tongue was Yiddish and Polish, she was a rabbi's daughter, born in Poland, but they were growing up in New York. And both of them met in New York, and they're in segregated country where they practically couldn't live. And so her grandmother was singing in Yiddish, her lullaby. So she grew up listening to Yiddish language, and her grandmother was speaking to her in English as well. So her grandfather died before the war, World War II in 1940, he died. But her grandmother continuing that culture, being, living in Russia, in Moscow, and raising her own daughter and the granddaughter. So she represents, really, and has that blood in her veins of all the nationalities you can imagine, including African, because her mother married African. He was, of course, with a Muslim background, but a communist who was executed during the changes in Zanzibar. So we have this representative of what the world should be.
Now, you've told a lot about, who these people are, and told a lot about how interesting these stories are. It's an unfinished story at this juncture. You're still in the process of making the film. You're still looking for additional funding to complete the project. How can somebody contact you? How can they participate in the project?
Well, we could follow us on Facebook. We are Black Russians, on Facebook we're The Red Experience. Black Russians, The Red Experience on Facebook. Our website is redpaletpictures.com. Is redpaletpictures.com.
Palette, spell palette.
Like P-A-L-E-T-T-E. Red is a color, redpaletpictures.com. We will be launching our fundraising campaign in 2-3 weeks, and where we would like to fundraise more and just towards the completion of the project. We really want to finish it this year and hopefully, before even, the fall. But this is the idea. Yes, we do need money to finish it. And we're dealing with a lot of footage, archival footage. We're talking about, editing and everything. So, yes, we would like Yelena to come here to interview her more, to fill out the gaps. And that's the idea. And I hope you guys hear me, hear us. This is a very important and timely project.
Well, you'll also be able to put this on your website, this whole hour. Even with my calling you Yevgeny at one point.
We'll go on the website.
Because you love Pushkin. It's Pushkin, Yevgeny, Yevgeny Onegin. And I know
yes,
I'm a representative of Russian culture.
Absolutely.
So yes, but yes, we definitely will be on Facebook. We had our Twitter account, and for some reason Twitter kind of blocked me at some point, and we want to be back. We will be back, and yes, on the website, we definitely will be launching the campaign, and we'll be sending you something as well.
And can people host fundraisers for you? Let's say if there's a church or if there's a cultural organization that wants to have a fundraiser for you where people can come and, even an art and an art exhibit, can they do that?
Yeah, oh yeah, that would be great. Synagogues, please. Our language is Yiddish. It will be mentioned many times. Churches, synagogues, any kind of organizations, whoever can host it, and we will be happy only to join.
Now, what is the I know that, you don't have, you're not a social surveyor, but what is the overall perception, in your opinion, of blacks in Russia? Because you're going to hear a lot of people say, yeah, if you go there, look what they called Obama, blah, 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 blah. But what is the perception of blacks in Russia by Russians?
Well, Russia is now a very xenophobic country, xenophobia there. So there's a perception of anybody who is different, not good. So at this point, we're dealing with a different country. It's the Soviet Union, no matter whatever Soviet Union did. With a lot of us, including my grandfather, was executed, being Jewish and Communist Party. But no, there was still officially racism was never allowed officially and non-officially, in Russia, in Soviet Union. It's different now. It's absolutely different now. It's a xenophobic country. It's racist. It's against everybody, so except Russians, very Slavic now, movement.
Like much of the rest of the world has become, including sadly, the United States.
Absolutely. That's why I think that the film is very timely, because it's about it. It's actually about, that's what the world has to look at, because we all one people here, so that's what...
Well, here I'm not sure. Yes, they all want one people in Russia, and here we're becoming that way. Although Ardina and I are examples of people who don't fit that paradigm.
Right. What I mean is by here, I mean the planet. I don't even mean in America.
I thought you meant in America. Okay.
What I mean is more a global. It's a global
citizenry.
issue.
Okay, yes, that's a different. I didn't realize.
It's a global idea as well.
Okay.
Of the film. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And speaking of global, we should talk about our show coming up next week. We're going to have the head of the Hudson, I believe it's the Hudson Valley chapter of the Sierra Club, Ed Berry. And Peter says that's an apt name for somebody who may
have a raspy voice.
And remember, if you want to participate in Yelena's film project, you can check out in a search engine and check out Black Russians, The Red Experience, and also Red Palette Pictures.
Great. And John will be away next week. He'll be doing Indy cars in Phoenix, Arizona, his adopted other state, apparently. And politics, a lot of Republicans in Arizona, John.
They are, and they're leaving. So the bottom line is that, Jeff Flake is leaving and John McCain is leaving. So it's one of these things that there's a transitional situation out there.
You guys have a great week. And I hope